As the first wave of shells landed around them, Emilia calmly ordered whilst still clutching a terrified Aquino. All guns return fire. We cannot allow them to damage the convoy. Yes ma'am, the gunnery officer said as they spoke into a tube and repeated the order to the gun crews. All guns fire at will. Don't let them leave alive. Almost immediately after the order was said, the main guns opened up with a massive explosion as 8 20-inch shells flew towards their targets. Suddenly there was a large bang as one of the cruisers was ripped in two as the shells tore through the poorly armored decks before detonating in the magazine and engine room. The enemy crews were shocked at how quickly they had lost one of their comrades and of how violently it was sunk. Breaking out of their shock, they quickly returned fire, hitting the superstructure of the H-44. However, it didn't cause any damage and just bounced off. Meanwhile, back in the bridge of the H-44 when the enemy cruiser exploded. Excellent. Keep firing. We'll make sure they'll never try to target a convoy while we are there, Emilia said as she watched the cruiser sink. As she spoke, the shells from the remaining cruisers slammed into the side of the H-44's massive superstructure that just bounced off or exploded, causing no damage, just scratching the gray camouflage paint. Seeing that there was no damage, the crew of the H-44 all sniggered at their enemy's futile attempt at trying to damage them. Coming out of the smoke of the burning remnants of the destroyed cruiser, the H-44 again launched another salvo of shells at one of the remaining cruisers. This time the shells landed around the cruiser, causing it to roll around from the shockwaves created by the shells detonating on the surface of the ocean. Stunned from the shockwaves, the crew of said cruiser's only thoughts were of self-preservation. The cruiser then began to turn away, abandoning their mission and leaving the remaining cruiser to its fate. Turning their attention to the remaining cruiser, the crew of the H-44 turned their main artillery towards them, preparing to unleash the full power of their guns onto the panicking crew of the light cruiser. All guns prepare to fire, Emilia said as the turrets locked onto the cruiser. The guns of the light cruiser began to open up, unleashing salvos as quickly as the loaders could do it, trying to distract the gunners of the H-44 from destroying them. Ignoring the futile attempt to distract them, the gunners of the H-44 waited for their orders to fire. Once the cruiser had stopped firing to reload, Emilia then said, "All guns, fire." Hearing their orders, the gunners opened up with the 20-inch shells that shredded the armor plating of the cruiser before vanishing into the depths of the ship. Seconds went by, which to the crew of the stricken cruiser felt like hours before the timed fuses on the high explosive shells went off, blowing the cruiser 4 feet out of the water before erupting into a massive plume of flame, tearing the ship asunder with the smaller pieces splashing into the sea a few meters away from the H-44. A veil of smoke covered the battlefield, hiding the wreckage from the sight of the crew of the H-44. As the ship sank, the smoke gradually dissipated once the raging fires had been extinguished by the sea, as the wrecks were enveloped by the water and sank with no wreckage left floating on the surface. Remembering about the remaining cruiser, Emilia said, "Let's give that remaining cruiser a going away present, shall we?" "Yes ma'am," the crew on the bridge called out. "I want that cruiser crippled, not destroyed. Turret Alpha, target the engine room of that cruiser," Emilia said. Once she said this, the Alpha turret, the one at the very front, turned to target the fleeing cruiser. As the turret had finished turning and had locked onto the cruiser, Emilia said, "Fire." Almost instantly the main battery guns fired. The 2 20-inch shells were sent screaming on their way. 20 seconds later they punched through the deck armor before landing in the engine room, tearing one of the engines to pieces and badly damaging the second one. As their source of movement was gone, the cruiser's speed was decreased to crawling pace. Seeing that the cruiser was pretty much at a standstill, Emilia said, "Let them go back, it can serve as a warning to not attack us. Continue maintaining to head back to align ourselves with the convoy." "Yes ma'am," the crew said. As they turned away, Aquino said, "Mummy, that was so cool. I want to be like you when you grow up." Emilia glanced down at Aquino, who was still clutching her waist worriedly. Hesitantly, Emilia asked, "Are you sure? You do know that all the people on those ships were killed, right?" Nodding her head, Aquino said, "I know Mummy, but I still want to become like you." Sigh. "Very well, When you're old enough I'll enroll you to the Naval Academy for you. I just don't want you to suffer the guilt that comes when you kill someone. Emilia said tiredly. It's okay, Mummy. I'll become the greatest naval commander ever, so you won't have to worry about me. Aquino cheered enthusiastically. Oh, my dear, it's a mother's duty to worry, so no matter what you do, I'll always be worried for you as you never know what might happen. Emilia said kindly as she rested her chin on top of Aquino's head as she hugged her daughter into her chest. Okay Mummy, I'll promise to be careful, Aquino said while looking up at Emilia with puppy eyes. Good, that's all I can ask for, Emilia said. Suddenly a sailor burst into the bridge and said, Mom, one of the motor launches is missing. What? Emilia cried in surprise. I want all crew on the boat deck. Form them up on the deck to take a head count. Yes Mom, the crew in the bridge said. Talking into a speaking tube Emilia said, this is the captain speaking. I want all crew formed up on the boat deck in 5 minutes. As the crew arrived on the deck they all stood there confused as to why they were there. I wonder why we're here, one of the crew members muttered to the person next to him. Who knows, the crew member replied. We'll probably find out soon though because the captain is coming now. As Emilia came to stand in front of the crew, silence fell over the deck as they waited for her to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, I've called you here to inform you that one of the motor launches is missing and has been taken by someone. As the crew gasped in surprise, Emilia asked her second in command who was stood next to her and asked, are all of the crew accounted for? We are just getting the rest of the registers in. Mom, she said. It seems that there is one member missing, she said while looking at the registers. Who is it? Emilia asked. It's Warrant Officer Kaito, Mom, she said in response. I see, Emilia said before turning back to the crew and saying, everyone, does anyone know of the whereabouts of Warrant Officer Kaito? Everyone just looks confused as to why she was asking before they all started to realize that Kaito was the one that had taken the boat. Then one of the crew members said, Mom, I saw him heading towards the lifeboat area when the battle first started. I haven't seen him since. I see. Thank you for letting us know, Emilia said as she looked to the person who spoke before turning back to the rest of the gathered crew and saying, unless anyone has anything else they would like to say, then you may return to your duties, as that is all I was going to say. Turning to an officer stood behind her, she said, dismiss the crew to their duties for me please. The officer replied and said, yes Mom. Not staying to watch the men get dismissed. Emilia went over to collect Aquino, who was being fussed over by her second in command. Unfortunately, she didn't notice that Emilia was there, and so she kept pampering Aquino, who was in her arms. Lieutenant, Emilia called to get the lieutenant's attention. Mom, she said panicked. Do you think I could have my daughter back? Lieutenant, Emilia said with an unsettlingly calm smile on her face. Of course, Mom, she said as she gave Aquino back to her commanding officer. Thank you, Emilia said as she held Aquino in her arms. Come dear, it's getting late. Let's go have dinner. Yes Mummy, Aquino said as Emilia carried her as they headed towards the officers' mess. Turning back to look at her second in command, Emilia said, Lieutenant, do you want to join us for dinner? If it's alright with you Mom, then I would be honored to join you, she said nervously. Come along then. We don't want to be late now, do we? Emilia asked rhetorically with a light smile on her face. Flustered, the lieutenant said, yes Mom, I'll be right behind you. Good, let's go then, Emilia said as she turned back to head towards the officers' mess with her lieutenant close behind. Arriving at the officers' mess, Emilia said, well then, shall we sit down then? Yes Mom, the lieutenant said as Emilia placed Aquino in the seat next to her and then sat down with the lieutenant sitting opposite the pair. So have you decided on what you're going to have? Emilia asked Aquino and the lieutenant after they had spent a few minutes looking at the menu. I'll have a pizza please, Aquino said looking up at her mother with a hopeful expression. Of course dear. And Lieutenant, what will you have? Emilia said warmly. I think I'll have a Caesar salad, she said. Very well then, Emilia said as she called over a waiter. Good evening, Admiral. What will you three be having this evening? The waiter asked. We'll have one pizza, one Caesar salad and one chicken tempura, please, Emilia said, ordering for all of them. Certainly, ma'am. And what would you like to drink for this evening? The waiter replied. We'll have a bottle of sake to share and a glass of orange juice, please, Emilia said after consulting the two others sitting with her. Of course, ma'am, we'll get onto it right away, the waiter said as he saluted to his commanding officers and left to give the order to the chef. Now that we have some time for our food to be prepared, why don't we get to know one another and tell each other our likes and dislikes, ma'am? The lieutenant suggested. Very well. That seems like a good idea, Emilia said. I'll start if no one minds, she said. Seeing that there were no objections, Emilia said, I am Admiral Emilia Schneider. I was born in Hamburg, Germany. I am 32 years old. My likes are my daughter Aquino, my sister and her family and friends, and making sure my ship is in top condition. My dislikes are perverts. Anyone who tries to hurt my friends and family and my ship being badly damaged. Who's going to go next? I'll go next if you don't mind, the lieutenant said meekly. Of course you can, Emilia said encouragingly. Okay then, the lieutenant started as she gained more confidence as she went along. My name is Lieutenant Akari Miyamoto. I was born in Osaka on the island of Honshu. I am 24 years old. My likes are my family and friends and looking after the ship. My dislikes are perverts and anyone who tries to hurt my family and friends. And you're my idol, Akari said to Emilia as she blushed heavily at the end while whispering the last part in embarrassment. Oh, that's cute, Emilia teased her, causing Akari's blush to get darker. Anyway, it's your turn, darling, Emilia said to Aquino. Okay, mummy. I am Aquino Misaki Schneider. I was born in Matsumoto in Nagano Prefecture. I am 7 years old. My likes are mummy and having friends. My dislikes are lightning storms and anyone who hurts or makes mummy upset, and I want to be just like mummy when I grow up, Aquino said as she looked up at Emilia with stars in her eyes at the end. Oh, I love you too, dear. If you want, I can train you to become a captain when you get older, Emilia said as she hugged Aquino to herself. Yes please mummy, came the muffled reply from between her breasts. When Emilia saw that their food was coming, she brought Aquino out of the hug, putting her back into her seat. After they finished their meals and the two officers had got to know each other better, they stood up to leave. Before they left, Aquino, who had fallen asleep, was placed with her on Emilia's lap as she stroked her hair comfortingly. When they stood up, Emilia said to Akari, "Good night Akari, have a nice sleep and I'll see you in the morning." "Thank you, Mom. I hope you have a good rest yourself. And good night to you too Aquino," Akari said softly so to not wake Aquino up as she stroked her cheek. "You have such a cute daughter Mom. I'm jealous." "I know, she's so adorable isn't she?" Emilia said as she looked down at Aquino lovingly. "And when we're alone, please call me Emilia, not by my rank. Can you do that for me?" Emilia said as she turned back to look at Akari. "Of course Mom. I mean Emilia," Akari said, blushing in embarrassment after noticing her mistake. "Well, good night Akari," Emilia said as she turned to leave with a still sleeping Aquino in her arms. "Good night Emilia," Akari said as she too went to leave the officer's mess. Carrying Aquino so that her head was in the crook of her neck, Emilia gently stroked the back of her head to keep her asleep. Once she got to her room, Emilia placed Aquino into the bed and getting herself ready for bed, Emilia climbed into bed and held Aquino protectively in her arms. As Emilia held her, Aquino muttered in her sleep, "Love you, Mama." Hearing this, Emilia smiled heartwarmingly and replied with, "I love you too, my darling daughter, my little Aquino," Emilia said as she kissed the top of Aquino's head, before falling asleep herself. 3 months later, the H-44 was heading towards the home port of Kuri after an uneventful patrol. Sitting on Emilia's lap, Aquino said, "Mummy?" "Yes, dear," Emilia said in response. "Will your family like me, Mummy?" Aquino asked nervously. "Of course they will, dear. They are an extremely kind family. They'll love you, my dear." Emilia smiled at her comfortingly. "Okay Mummy," Aquino said as returned to looking out of the window. "Good dear. We'll be docking shortly. Would you like to help me with the preparations? Emilia said as she stroked Akino's head gently. Yes please mummy, Akino said as she looked up at Emilia in excitement. Alright dear, come with me, Emilia said as she lifted Akino off her lap and placed her onto the floor. Getting out of her chair and walking to stand by the microphone on the control panel in front of her and said, "Attention, this is the captain speaking. All hands prepare to dock. We'll be arriving at Kuri dockyards in half an hour." After saying her announcement, Emilia walked away from the microphone, lifting Akino into her arms before saying to the radio operator, "Signal the harbor. Tell them that we'll be arriving in half an hour's time so long as all goes well." "Yes ma'am," the radio operator said. Turning back to the microphone, Emilia then said, "All crew, once we have docked and before you leave today for sure, I want you all to form up at the bow please. Thank you." Meanwhile, with the Munetani siblings. "Attention class," the teacher said. "As you may know, today is the day that the H-44 is set to return, and all students who have family on board are being given the rest of the day off to be at the docks when they return. Those students may leave now for their parents to take them to the docks." "Wait, Aunt is coming back," Mashiro said in excitement. "Really?" Mafuayu asked. "Yes, I can't wait to see her," Mashimo said as they all rushed out of the classroom to meet their parents to take them to the dockyard. Outside the school, the Munetani siblings ran up to their waiting parents who said, "Well girls, are you ready to see Auntie Emilia after all this time?" Mayuki asked her children. "Yes mama," they all said as their family got into the car and drove away to the dockyards. Half an hour later, the H-44 began to pull into the dockyard with the crowd cheering wildly. As the H-44 arrived at its docking area, the whole ship ground to a halt as the crowd watched and waited. A few minutes later, all the crew members began to gather on the bow deck with them facing towards the main battery guns. As the last crew member had formed up, Emilia walked onto the deck and stood in front of the gathered crew. Silence fell over the deck and the watching crowd out of respect for Emilia. Suddenly she spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, all crew of the H-44, I would have a speech planned for this moment, but let's face it, we would all much rather go home to our families than having to listen to it, so I'll keep it short." Some quiet chuckles were heard at that. "All crew, it has been my pleasure to lead you all on this journey. We all have been through a lot together, and I am proud that you are all part of our family, and to those that will be coming back after their leave, I'll welcome you back with open arms. To those that are leaving us to go to another vessel or are leaving the Navy, I wish you the best of luck in your future. That is all I wanted to say, so once this has finished, you are free to leave." Emilia stepped to the side as Akari handed Akino back and took over for Emilia and said, "When I fall you out, all of your crew members can take your stuff off of the ship and can go and see your families. Squad, attention." An officer on parade dismissed. After they had all fallen out, they rushed to get to their cabins to get their stuff and leave. With Akino and Akari with her, Emilia calmly walked back to her cabin to get their stuff. A few minutes later, Emilia and Akino, who stood at the end of the gangway to say goodbye to the crew and shake their hands as they got off of the ship. Once the last of the crew had disembarked, Emilia and Akino walked down the gangway to the waiting Munetani family. Upon noticing Emilia heading towards them, the three sisters got out of their parents' sight and launched themselves at Emilia, hugging her at different parts of her body, screaming, "Auntie, you're back." "Ah, hello my dears. I'm back," Emilia said as she gave them each a hug in return. "It's good to see you again, sister," Mayuki said as she gave Emilia a hug. "It's good to see you too, sis," Emilia said as she returned the hug. "Welcome back, Emilia," Mayuki's husband said as he gave her a quick hug. "It's good to be back," Emilia said. "Now there is someone I want you to meet," Emilia said as she brought Akino from behind her. Embarrassed, Akino said, "Hello, it's nice to meet you." "Ah, so you're this Akino Emilia kept telling us about," Mayuki said. "Well, it's good to meet you and you're welcome to join our little family," Mayuki said as she brought Akino into a gentle hug. "It's nice to meet you, Auntie," Akino said. Once it got to Mashiro's turn, she lightly glared at Akino in suspicion, who stared back at her before their expressions lightened and they smiled to each other. Hugging Akino, Mashiro said, "It's good to see you, cousin." It's nice to meet you too, cousin, Aquino said. After everyone had introduced themselves, Emilia said, shall we go home now? Yeah, let's go, Mayuki said as they all left to go to Mr. Munetani's car. Once everyone was in the car with Emilia sitting in the back with the children, Aquino and Mashiro started glaring at each other again, both thinking the same thing. She's mine at the moment that they laid eyes on each other. Their rivalry over their mother-aunt began. Once they arrived at home they all went in and had dinner. All through dinner Aquino and Mashiro were every so often glaring at each other so that the other occupants of the room didn't notice them. Later that night, with everyone getting ready for bed, upon entering her room, Emilia was greeted to 4 children sitting on her bed watching her. Sighing softly to herself, Emilia asked, are you all ready for bed? Yes, Auntie Mama, they replied. Good, let's go to sleep then, Emilia said as she lay down in the middle of the bed, with Mashimo and Mafuayu on either side of her clutching her arms with Mashiro and Aquino lying on her chest. After having such an eventful day the 4 children quickly fell asleep. Kissing them all on the heads, Emilia said softly, I love you my dears and I always will. Before she too fell asleep she heard the children reply, I love you too, Auntie Mama. Smiling softly at their reply, Emilia gave them all a soft hug before succumbing to the need for sleep.